How do you build products customers actually want? In this show, we talk to Dan Olsen, an entrepreneur who fleshed out the abstract idea of product market fit into a concrete set of steps to help new product developers avoid the trap of solution pollution and falling in love with their ideas.
Hi friends, welcome back to the Evolving Leader Podcast. I'm Scott Allender.
And I'm John Gomes.
How are you feeling today, John?
I'm feeling very cheerful, not least because I've been trying to get our guest onto this show for quite some time, and he's incredibly busy. I read his book, it's well over 5 years ago now, and it's been a continuous source of help and inspiration. So yeah, I'm feeling really good. How are you feeling, Scott?
Feeling super energized. I feel like things are heading in a really positive direction. Very busy, but it's a good busy, and I'm eager to dive in today to talk to Dan, because we are joined by Dan Olsen. Dan is a consultant, author, and speaker. He works with CEOs and product leaders to help them build strong product teams. Dan has worked with a wide range of businesses, from small early-stage startups to large public companies, on a wide variety of web and mobile products. His clients include Google, Walmart, Amazon, Facebook, Box, Microsoft, and many, many more. Prior to consulting, Dan worked at Intuit, where he led the Quicken product team to record sales and profit. After that, he was a product leader of several startups and began his career designing nuclear-powered submarines. Do I have that right? That's amazing. Dan wrote the bestseller, The Lean Product Playbook, which I know you're a fan of, John, and he lives in Silicon Valley, where he hosts the monthly Lean Product and Lean UX Meetup, a frequent speaker at business and tech events. Dan enjoys sharing ideas and comparing notes with as many people as he can, and we really can't wait for our conversation with him and to hear all his notes today. So Dan, welcome to the Evolving Leader.
Thanks, Scott and John. Nice to be here.
So Dan, how are you feeling?
I feel good. It was May the 4th yesterday. I'm a Star Wars fan, so it's all good.
So let's start with a bit of your background. What's your origin story? Where did your work in product begin? And what fuels your passion for it?
Yeah, well, as Scott said in the intro, actually, my first job out of college was designing nuclear-powered submarines, which was an awesome job. In hindsight, it was actually a very, very technical kind of product management job. I mean, my title was engineer. But after doing that, I went to business school. And in business school, trying to figure out what I wanted to do after graduation, I learned about this emerging career called product management that sounded really, really interesting. Because I had a technical background. I was an electrical engineering major. My parents had gotten me a computer when I was a kid, so I was used to coding. So it sounded perfect. The more I learned about it, the more I thought it sounded good. But I had never done it. So I asked people, where's the best place to learn product management? At the time, pretty much everybody said Intuit was the best place to learn. So I was fortunate to get a job at Intuit. And that's my first official product manager job. I learned a lot at Intuit. A lot of what's in my book, The Lean Product Playbook, the foundations of that were created at Intuit that I learned there. So, and I've been in product management ever since. I love it. It's great to see how much it's grown and exploded over the last several years. And so I'm excited to get to work with, various product teams to see what challenges they're facing and help them solve those challenges and help train them to improve their skills.
So you start your book with the sentence, "Building great products is hard." Can you talk us through why products fail and perhaps why organizations keep building things that we may not want?
Yeah, I mean, we've all heard the statistics of over 80% of new products fail, or 90%, depending on which survey you look at. So that's just kind of proof that it's hard. If it wasn't so hard, we'd have better statistics on successful products, and you see companies going out of business. So I think it's challenging because it's hard to get your head around exactly what needs to be done. And actually, I was thinking about this morning, so many people focus on the execution of let's do this thing, and not as clear on what are the whys behind it? What are the objectives? Why do we think this is going to be successful, right? So I think that's it, is everyone's doing their best, just trying to ship product and get what they think is going to be helpful out there. And the question really is, how much uncertainty and risk is there baked into the assumptions that they've made, either explicitly or implicitly, right? So people make a lot of hypotheses and assumptions all the time because we've got to be, we got to make decisions every day about what to build. And some of those are more validated and informed by data than others. And the default is you make your best guess and you move forward, right? that's kind of that's how humans get through the world, and that's how we get through the business world as well, right?
So you posit that most products fail due to poor market fit or poor product market fit. Can you give us your definition of poor product fit?
Yeah, I mean, basically, it ties into why products fail is they're not fundamentally addressing a real customer need or problem, right? Somebody thinks we should build X. I think we should build X, and we go and build X, and then you're rolling the dice to see whether people like it or not, as opposed to starting with, wow, I talked to 50 people, and 40 of them said they have this problem that's really bothering them. Let's see what we can do to solve that problem. So it gets into probably the next thing we're going to talk about, which is problem space versus solution space. But basically, number one issue is, are you solving a problem, a real problem that customers are aware that they have, right? If customers are telling you, hey, gosh, this podcasting recording stuff, it's just not easy enough to use. I have these issues with it. If you could then listen to their issues about the podcasting software and then build a new one that address those issues, that would be a much higher likelihood way of creating value, right? So that's part of it, is people don't solve on problems. And then the second thing is, they solve problems, but they don't solve the problems in a way that's any better or different than the other products that are out there. You launch a Me Too product, why would people use your product over other products, right? So achieving good product market fit means solving a high importance customer problem in a way that's better than the competition. That's kind of what it takes to have a successful product. And that's why, again, those odds are so low.
So, I mean, when I got your book, the idea of product market fit had been circulating around for a while. Mark Andreessen, Steve Blank, and stuff like that. But you were the first really to kind of put it into a really clear model that people could action, and you broke it down into these stages of the problem space and the solution space, and actually that creates a fundamental change in people's minds, because they're living in this kind of solution space the whole time, and they don't even see this thing. They see it as a way. It's almost like selling. Let me figure out what I need to understand about you so I can sell my idea to you. This notion that forget your product and your solution, your engineering skills, or whatever it is. There's a thing out here which is devoid of all of that. You need to understand that. Can you just talk us through that? Talk us through the kind of layers of that model.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, basically, product market fit was coined by Mark Andreessen back in a blog post in 2007 titled "The Only Thing That Matters." And, Mark's awesome, but he just kind of said, hey, it's one of these definitions like, hey, you know it when you have it. Your servers are melting down, your products are flying off the shelves, people can't get enough of it. It's a very kind of qualitative description of what it is, but there wasn't really a rigorous definition of what does it take to achieve it. And as I mentioned, my background's engineering, so I kind of am used to kind of having rigorous frameworks that you can kind of kick the tires on and explain things, right? And so that's what led me to create the product market fit pyramid, which you're referring to, which are the elements of it, right? And basically, it emerged from my consulting that I was doing, having worked on so many products myself and with other teams, and teaching workshops and speaking to product teams. I remember there was one workshop in particular where it was a really sharp group of people, and they're like, well, what do you do next? And then what do you do next? And then they wanted like a step-by-step thing of what do you do? And I remember like doing it on the whiteboard and like running out of space and having to go around the corner and stuff. But basically, the 5 layers, the market layers at the foundation of the pyramid is the target customer. Everything starts with who are you trying to create value for, right? And because if that changes, like a real pyramid, each layer builds on the layers beneath it, right? And if you change who it's for, then the whole pyramid could come crashing down. You might have to build it up. The next layer is for that customer, what are their underserved needs? And this is the problem space you were talking about versus solution space, right? And exactly like you said, John, we live in solution space. The default way of thinking for everybody is solution space, right? Developers have to ship working code in solution space. Designers have to create pixel mockups in solution space, right? And so it is a learned kind of mindset. It's a learned thing. You have to realize it, and it's kind of like a sense. It's kind of like sight or hearing. Like once you realize it, you're like, oh, okay, I get it. You just proposed a solution. Like you just said we should build a configurator, or you just said we should build a dropdown, or we should, build this kind of widget. When somebody says that, that is a solution. Even if you say, hey, I think we should go to Pizza Hut for lunch, that's a very specific solution, right? And you recommended Pizza Hut because you had some objectives in mind, like you feel like pizza, you want something quick, it's close by, but those are all buried and invisible, if you will, unless we make them explicit. And so that goes right to the heart of what Scott asked. That's why products fail, people do not shine a light on those assumptions that led them to decide what to do, what they're going to do, or build what they're going to do. So they build what they're going to build. So those bottom two layers of the market, a group of people that share a set of common needs. And then the three product layers that sit above it with a gap in between them. The first one is your value proposition, which is, okay, which benefits are we going to actually promise to customers our product delivers on? And how is it going to meet those benefits in a way that's better than the competition? That's the key, right? That's where product strategy lives. Okay, great. You've identified the benefits, you're going to provide. We're going to be better podcasting software. How exactly are we going to be better podcasting recording software? Are we going to be faster? Are we going to be cheaper? Are we going to have a higher quality sound? What is our special sauce? And that's where I like to use the Kano model, which I learned earlier in my career. The next step then, once we got that clarity, and this is all in the problem space, by the way, we're still in the problem space. Now we can transition. Once we've got that solid foundation in the problem space, we can transition to the solution space. And so, okay, given that we're going after this customer to try to solve these problems for them in this special sauce way, what features do we need to build or to deliver on that? Now we transition. Now we've got that grounding before we go to solution space and the problem space. If we can say, okay, if we want to provide the highest quality audio, what do we need to do technically? What features do we need to build then, right? And that's where the concept of MVP comes in, where you want to figure out what's the bare minimum we need to put, a functionality we need to include in this product to see whether or not we're on the right path. And then the last layer is user experience, right? So once you define your feature set, then you say, okay, great, what's the user experience for this set of features going to be? And then that's the product market fit pyramid. You're making these decisions about value prop, feature set, and user experience, going after a certain set of people with a certain set of needs. And product market fit is just how well did the decisions you made in the product land resonate with the market, basically.
I love what you're saying here so much. I was having a conversation this morning with a group of leaders, and we were trying to stay with the problem and found that we kept sliding over into solution before we had a clear understanding of the problem. So these are wonderful steps to outline. How do you build the mindset or awareness rather of understanding when you're sort of sliding into that, catching yourself in real time so you can pull yourself and the team back into the problem space when it's not time for the solution yet?
Yeah, I mean, step one is you need someone in that group. So this is the power of groups, right? When you do group work, is somebody in that group needs to have a high degree of problem space awareness, or at least a medium degree of problem space awareness, because it's not probably practical that everybody is going to have that, develop that skill. Just like we're all not great designers or all great developers. And by the way, to go back to what I said, if developers' job is to develop in the solution space and designers' job is to design in the solution space, it begs the question, who is responsible for the problem space? And that's where product managers' main thing is. And I use the word, so if developers develop, designers design, product managers define. And so whoever has that definition role, whoever's job it is, it could be the head of product. If they're in an executive meeting with the leaders, it could be the head of product, could be head of design, somebody like that. Even when you're really trained in it, it's not like you're going to be 100% focused on problem space. Even everybody that's well trained will slip, and I call it solution pollution. And so you just need to catch it when it happens, and you need to catch it when it happens, and then say, hey, John, I hear you advocating. You think it's really important that we, add a blockchain feature. I hear you. Can you help me understand why that would be useful to customers? So the way to have a hack is to say, hey, I hear you suggesting solution X or feature X. Can you help me understand why will that, in your mind, how is that going to create value for customers? Not in a challenging way, but in a clarifying way, right? And then you're helping that person bridge over to problem space and then making them actually explicitly consider the hypotheses or gut or whatever's going on that led them to that recommendation, right? So really it's just like when somebody proposes something, somebody needs to catch it and say, oh, great, I hear you recommending X. That could be interesting. Can you help me understand why? And then the very next question you go into and say, and great, and what evidence do we have? What evidence do we have that customers are, saying that's a problem or a big problem that they have, right? So, but the first step is getting to problem space. The second step, then we can go down a path of what kind of evidence do we have? Perfectly fine if we have no evidence. Let's just acknowledge it. Okay, we have a gut. I talked to a couple people and I get the sense this might be valuable. Great. And then, once you're, around the room, there's 10 different features people advocating. You can get at the 10 different problems that they're going to solve. You can kind of quantify the degree of uncertainty that we've got about each of those. And then you can go try to systematically say, okay, wow, this one we're pretty confident about. Let's just put that on the roadmap. That sounds good. This other one, it sounds like we don't have a lot of evidence or data. Let's go out and go talk to 10 customers and see if we can clarify if this really is an important bad problem or not.
So I like the story that you tell in the book around the space pen that Fisher designed for NASA. Can you just tell us that story?
Sure. Yeah. So, to make this problem space solution space more tangible, I wanted to find kind of a memorable example. And so for me, the best one is the space pen. Now, the first thing I always say, because, is if you Google space pen, you'll end up in like urban legend saying, no, NASA didn't do this and NASA didn't pay the money. Totally true. NASA didn't do it. NASA didn't pay the money. But if you read the stuff carefully, it doesn't actually contradict what I'm about to say, which is Fisher, one of their subcontractors, not NASA, and NASA didn't ask him. This guy on his own said, hey, you know what? We know that these ballpoint pens that rely on gravity on Earth, we know that they're not going to work in space because there's no gravity. And, astronauts need a way to write up there. So I think we can invent a pen that'll write in space. So he did it on his own. NASA didn't ask him. NASA didn't pay him. He spent $1 million of his own money in the 60s, and he invented a space pen. And it works. It has a gas pressurized canister. That's why it doesn't need gravity, right? And it works. Now, the Russians, they had to send their astronauts into space too. But instead of giving them space pens and inventing a space pen, they just gave them pencils. And when I give my talks, I show a little picture. It's a cheeky picture of like a red pencil in a box that says Russian space pen, right? And the reason I share that, and when I tell the story, I focus just on one specific requirement or need, which is the need to write in zero gravity and with no gravity, right? And the idea is that for a second, if that's the only requirement and they're both equally good solutions, then obviously the one that didn't take all that time and effort is superior from an ROI standpoint, right? We didn't spend all this money. We didn't. So there's like a high level, don't over-engineer or overbuild things. But the real reason I tell the story is not that. It's really that it's really easy to have solution pollution, right? And so when Mr. Fisher was articulating the problem he was trying to solve, and he said, hey, I think we can invent a pen that writes in space, he had solution pollution baked into what was ostensibly supposed to be a pure requirement statement, right? And it's the word pen, right? He had the word pen. So he had like already baked the solution into what the requirements were. Mm-hmm. This happens all the time, right? We need a blockchain that does this, or we need this, you need a chatbot that does this, right? This happens all the time where people dictate a solution, right? Now, it would have been better, and then I go, well, how could he have done better? If he had just been a little more vague and waved his hands and said a way to write in space, that would have been better than saying a pen that writes in space, because it would have been more solution agnostic, right? And then I use this, I show a picture of solution pollution, and I demonstrate this Y hack. So we can do even better about articulating what's the true problem we're trying to solve for astronauts in space here by saying, well, why do astronauts even need a way to write in space anyway? What's the fundamental need that they need? And you eventually get to something like, well, they need to record information and refer to it later. Right? Everybody can, that makes sense. It's not wrong. It's right. Well, it's kind of subtle, but that is an even more pure problem space description, because we've subtly taken out writing. First, it was a pen that writes in zero gravity. Then it was a way to write in zero gravity, but they both still had writing in it. Now we've gotten writing out. We've gotten to the true core, which is, hey, I need to be able to, capture information and refer to it later. Well, maybe it's subtle. We can now do a Siri thing or an Alexa thing, right? It opens up the solution space. That's the other thing. Now, those may not be technologically feasible at the time. That's not the point. The point is, by asking why, you can try to get deeper and deeper in the problem space and purer in the problem space where you're really solution agnostic, right? And the other thing I like to say for people is like, yes, I was only focusing on one requirement, which is writing in zero gravity. There are other requirements, like you don't want it to catch on fire, and a pencil can catch on fire. So I acknowledge all those things. But for me, it's still a very memorable example that people that understand what I'm trying to say, they understand, let's not invent a space pen here. Let's not dictate a solution here, right?
Mm. Yeah. Now, I think this point here around the two kind of takeaways for me here is, one is that people embed the solution into the problem all the time, and they don't know they're doing it because it's quite subtle. And then the second thing which you're saying here, which I think is important to draw out, is that if you frame the problem statement too tightly, then you prevent yourself from being creative, because essentially you're just reducing down all the parameters, and it's not a benefit of constraint. It's actually hemming your thinking in.
Yes.
So
yes.
the why, can you just, because you do this a lot, in terms of working with teams, that creates a lot of frustration for people because you don't get this immediate gratification of being able to come up with ideas, even if they're not very good ones. How do you help people to kind of change their mindset around being able to avoid the immediate gratification?
Yeah. Someone, I can't remember who it was. They wrote you can't change someone else's mind. They need to change their own mind. Right. And I think to a certain extent, that's pretty true. So a lot of times clients come to me after they've tried it their way, come up with a solution idea, build it, ship it, launch it. Oops, that didn't meet our goals. Do it again. After like the 10th big feature initiative that goes over budget, over time and does not meet their business goals, that leader needs to look themselves in the mirror and go, what's going on? We keep, the insanity is doing the same thing, expecting different results, right? So it's like, so the people that come to me, they know something's broken and not working. And so they go, okay, they're kind of, so in a sense, their mind is primed to be taught these things, right? And it's a matter of teaching, equipping them with the tools, walking through examples and case studies. We'll also, do their own work instead of like I have curated case studies, but then we'll say, okay, cool, let's have your teams do, your product teams break out into workshop breakout groups and, fill out who is their target customer. And then a lot of times it's the first time anyone's actually put pen to paper to write down what it is. Because that's the other thing we didn't talk about, John and Scott, is it's not about being at the superficial level. And I use the metaphor of an onion. An onion, like ogres, has many layers, right? And so the first thing you come up with is the outer layer of the onion, and the example here was, for example, I was judging a startup competition and I was just going around using my rubric. The first thing I would ask is, hey, who's your target customer? And a group said millennials. And this happens a lot in the product world. You get an answer that at first blush sounds specific and sounds good. You're like, okay, cool. They know who it is. Millennials. Sounds good. But then I scratched my head. I'm like, well, wait a minute. How many millennials are there in the world? There's millions of millennials. They're not all the same. Even though that sounds specific, it's actually not specific. And after talking with them a little bit, I realized their product was designed to basically ship a box to your house with the recipe and spices and as much prepared food ingredients for the recipe as it could. You might have to go to the store to buy something, but to minimize the amount of shopping and prep that you needed to do. And so after talking with them, I reflected them, well, it sounds like your product is for millennials. That's the first layer of the onion, who want to cook at home. That was implicit. They didn't make it explicit, right? Because not all millennials want to cook at home, right? And then the third was, but are too busy, because there are some millennials who want to cook at home that cook at home because they make time for it. So that was a way of adding two layers of the onion and significantly kind of refining the definition of what they do, right? So it's walking people through this experientially. A lot of it has to be experiential, which is why I've increasingly focused on doing workshops, right? Mark Andreessen also famously said, software is eating the world. I think part of why product management is exploding in the last several years is people realize, yeah, we've got tons of developers, but if you want successful software, you need to have adequate product management staffing as well. And so I think people realizing that. So it's experiential learning and guiding people through this. But back to your fundamental point, usually people come to me because they realize that the way they're doing it isn't working, or there's a better way to do it. Maybe they came from another company where there was a better way of doing it, or there's some reason to believe that what they're doing isn't quite working as well as they'd like. And failure can be a very powerful motivator. Right? If things are going well in a company, they're going to be much less like say, you know what, let's upset the apple cart here. Why are we doing things this way? They're going to kind of probably continue doing what they're doing. But the best is when a company is successful and they keep trying to do what they're doing, and all of a sudden they experience failure. Like the market conditions have changed, or the people on the team have changed. Something's changed, and that's when they go, huh. And then, there's two types of leaders. The ones that just blindly go on and say, keep rowing in that direction, keep doing it. And the ones that go, huh, something's changed here. What's changed? Let's talk about it. Figure out how we can make it better.
So you talked about, this idea of the MVP, the minimal viable proposition or product. And I think that's become a more common language. People are using it in all sorts of guises now outside of product. They're running MVPs on all sorts of stuff.
Right.
And a lot of them aren't MVPs. They're not minimal. They're not viable. So tell us what you've learned about that idea and translating it into something that really works.
Yes. And this is, some of these terms whenever you have frameworks and movements and things like that, like there's terms, there's new buzzwords. And so product market fit was a buzzword. It was one that wasn't really super well defined, right? People just kind of talked about it simplistically, like, yeah, you either have it or you don't. It's like a true or false kind of thing. MVP is probably the most hotly debated, contested term in our world. There are people that argue that this is an MVP, this is not an MVP. There are people that just want to banish the term because it just causes so much trouble. They want to, you've heard minimum lovable product, minimum sellable product, maximum. People coming up with these alternative terms. And I think, I understand where people are coming from saying, let's not use the term anymore because it's so interpreted so differently by different people. But just creating a new term, it's going to have the same thing's going to happen. The same thing's going to happen if you do a new term. So that doesn't solve the problem. So for me, a minimum viable product, as you said, it's meant to be minimum. The minimum means like what's the least amount of functionality scope we need to test this hypothesis, right? So for me, one thing that helps is if you ground it in your value proposition. That's why for me, it's the next step right after value proposition. You have to ground it in something. Okay, we've decided that we're going to have the best podcasting recording software because it's going to have higher audio quality, and be easier to use. Those are the two things. Those are what I call your unique differentiators. So guess what? When we do our MVP, we better have something about auto quality and ease of use in there. Otherwise, what the heck are we doing, right? It's like you're saying one thing and doing something else. So having a value prop and knowing how your product's going to be better, different really helps. And I think that's part of why most people are flailing on MVP is they don't have a clear value prop to start with. And so it's like, what do you want to do the MVP? I don't know, Scott. What do you want in the MVP? I don't know, John. What do you want? It's just random opinions again, right? Mm-hmm. So when you can ground it, you say, okay, what's the bare minimum we need to have better audio quality than the other podcasting software? What's the minimum we need to have better ease of use, right? And the number one thing is like, what can wait? What can wait? And that's the toughest thing because when you're sitting around a room and somebody says, gosh, wouldn't feature X be great? Of course feature X would be great. Who's going to argue with adding feature X to the product? Who would have a case for why not? It's like each new feature idea someone suggests around the table. I like to say it's like this cute little puppy. Oh, look at this cute little pup. Who wouldn't want to pet this cute little pup? Look at it, right? Every idea when it's in the moment, in the spotlight's on it, in the conference table, it sounds amazing. Sure, do it, right? But what happens is, each of those ideas has a cost and a time frame, but nobody talks about that in the conference room, especially if it's a big exec saying, I think we should do blockchain. Everyone goes, yeah, that's a great idea. But no one talked about, well, that's going to delay our launch by 4 months if you want that, right? So part of it is making those trade-offs explicit and so that we can have an explicit discussion. If it's really critical to put in the MVP, great. So once you agree on this is another subtle nuance that causes problems is that once you agree on what the feature set is, what the scope of functionality is, you have two choices now. You can either go build it, which is what most people do, or you can say, you know what, let's prototype it and test it before we do any building. And and the reason people go for option A instead of B is largely due to lack of experience or lack of staffing. Like we don't have prototype, we don't have designers in house, so I guess we'll just build it. That's what we do. Once we define the functionality, we build it, we code it. Well, that's very risky because then you're going to go spend months building it. You're going to launch it, and it's very risky. So in my book and in many other books, they advocate build a prototype and test it. And so that's where you get another difference of opinion is, well, is that prototype technically an MVP or is it not an MVP until we actually build the thing? That's kind of like a nuanced thing. Who cares? You're testing what your MVP is going to be. You're getting data on the MVP you are about to build. So call it an MVP prototype. So that's some of it's a terminology. So if people want to reserve the term MVP for the truly built product, then we can call the other thing an MVP prototype. You know what I mean? So those are some thoughts, and basically, as I'd like to say, nobody nails it the first time. Not even the big companies, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn. When they launch a new feature, they don't get it perfectly right the first time, right? So it's kind of like if you think of an archery target, a bullseye, nobody hits the bullseye on version 1, right? Most people don't even get on the target anywhere. And you don't even know which target, you maybe are even for the wrong target. Until you get your prototype out there in front of customers, that's when the real learning happens and you really get feedback that will guide you in the right direction. And then once you've validated your prototype, you can go back and say, okay, now we've confirmed that this feature set is going to deliver the value we need, and then you can go confidently build, and it's a much less risky way to do it.
I'm sure you've been asked this question before, but I'm always intrigued about the biggest pivots that people have made from their original idea. Where they've gone in a completely different direction as a result of it, which always freaks out senior leaders because they want certainty. You're selling me this idea, I bought this idea, and the team goes, well, we learned something completely different here, and we want to take it in this direction. What's the most extraordinary pivot you've seen?
Well, there's the story that I like to tell is I start out with Flickr. So Flickr was a photo sharing site that got acquired by Yahoo for a lot of money. But it didn't start out as a photo sharing site. It actually started out as a game. They were going to make a game, and the team was remotely distributed. This is well before COVID, but they were remotely distributed. And when you're making a game, there are a lot of graphics and image assets you need to use and share. And so to facilitate their work, they created a photo sharing platform to share all these graphic images. Well, the game didn't take off, but the photo sharing thing did. So they realized, hey, no one, this game isn't really going on, but everyone seems to really like this easy to use photo sharing platform. So they pivoted to Flickr, and then they got acquired. That same exact entrepreneur went to make another game a few years later. Once again, he had a distributed team. This time, for his distributed team to work better together, he created a robust chat platform that became Slack, right? So the same entrepreneur, Stuart Butterfield, tried to make a game twice and pivoted into these huge opportunities. So as I like to jokingly say, he's the world's worst game designer, but richest game designer, right? I'd love to work on his next game with him. That would be awesome, right? So he keeps trying to make games and pivoting into these, huge businesses. So, but that's because he's listening, right? So part of it is listening to what the market's telling you. And I do think, the longer I work in this field, if you listen to customers, right, active listening, they will pull you in the direction of creating more value. They'll pull you in the direction of greater product market fit. So in a certain sense, you want to go through all these steps, know what kind of where your uncertainties are, but the rubber really starts to hit the road when you get that MVP prototype in front of people. And now it's like, okay, we put our best foot forward. Now, Scott, tell me what you think about this podcasting software prototype. And then you'll be like, I like this, but I don't get this. This is weird. And that's when you really start to iterate, when you engage with customers with like a prototype.
I want to hear more about that because Steve Jobs once said something like, it's not the job of the customer to know what the product is for. So say more about when it's time to listen to the customer versus, when it's time to take perhaps an alternative approach. What's the real delineation there?
You always need to listen to the customer. The question is how you listen and what you ask them, right? Okay. The point is customers are not technologists, customers are not designers, and customers are not, product managers. So to say, customer, what would you like? They're not going to be able to fill in the dots for you, right? So, it's not their job to invent like the iPhone. Like, customers would never invent the iPhone. Yeah, I know. That's not their job to invent the iPhone. Only Apple and Steve Jobs could invent the iPhone, knowing what they know about customer problems. It's your job to know the customer problems, right? Another quote that gets brought up a lot is Henry Ford saying, if I asked customers what they want, they would have said a faster horse. They would never have said a car. Of course they wouldn't. All they know is a horse. That's kind of ridiculous to say, I expect customers to predict that they would want a car. But what you can do if you go back to problem space is, hey, do you value getting from point A to point B quickly? Yes. If you have a slow horse versus a faster horse, which one do you like? Well, I like the faster horse because it saves me time. Great. What if we had a way of getting you from point A to point B that was even faster? You see, like when you get to the core problem or benefit, then you can kind of go, well, of course, if we can come up with something faster, it's going to be great, right? And actually, I talk about in the book another example, because Apple famously doesn't do research. They don't do, they don't have like these big public betas and things like that, right? Part of it is, if you really understand your customer needs, you're just taking risks by not doing it. But if you have a really solid understanding, the risk can be lower than someone that has no understanding, right? And so one of the things I talk about was Touch ID on the phone. So if you remember, before we had Face ID on the iPhones, we had Touch ID on the iPhones, right? And before Touch ID, you just had to put a PIN in. You had to put in a PIN. You had to type in a PIN every time you went to your phone, right? So it's not customers' job to say, gosh, it'd be great if I could just log in with my finger, right? But what could Apple do? They could say, well, gosh, people are logging into their phone many, many times. When you do it with a PIN, it takes 3 seconds. We have this technology. We have this thing that technology can enable that'll do it in less than a second. So we can save people like 2 or 3 seconds every single time they log in. Would that be valuable to people or not? So now you've got a case for why you're saving people, minutes of time logging into their phone every day. You've got a case versus just saying, you know what? The solutions-based version I just came from this tech conference and they had this new fingerprint stuff. Let's just put that in there and see. I think that'd be cool. Let's put that in there, right? You're not tying it to how it's going to solve a customer problem, right? So that's kind of the idea is really understanding. It's not their job to understand what technology can do. It's your job to understand what the needs are and then combine that. That's what Apple's really good at, is understanding customer needs and then knowing what the cutting edge, forefront of technology is that can enable better ways to meet those needs.
Hi, Phil Kirby here, producer of The Evolving Leader. How do you feel when you're about to go into a conversation where you know you're going to face opposing views? What does it take for us to develop the courage to challenge the status quo? Back in Season 3 of the Evolving Leader podcast, our hosts John and Scott asked leading psychologist Todd Kashdan that same question. And if you'd like to listen to that episode, I'll put a link in the show notes.
So let's turn to product analytics to better understand needs. How can we use data, or how should we be using data to better understand consumer behavior?
Well, there's two different parts. So there's needs and there's behavior. So analytics are great for understanding behavior. They're not so great for understanding needs, right? If we have a page and it's our landing page and we see that we have a 20% conversion rate, that's good to know. But you don't know why the 20% converted. You don't know why the other 80% didn't convert, right? So this is where there's a fundamental difference between qualitative information and quantitative data. And as I posit in my book, when you're trying to achieve product market fit in the early days, and you're trying to clarify exactly who your customer is and what their needs are, honestly, qualitative is the best tool. I see people overuse surveys way too much. And surveys, it's like, hey, here's 10 features. Let's just do a survey to see what people think, right? If I did a survey, and let me just ask you guys, I'm working on this cool new photo sharing app. How would you like how much would you like a cool new photo sharing app? Would you like it? Scale 1 to 10? Yeah? You'd probably say 8, 7, 8, 9, right? Sure, why not?
Yeah, sure.
What did I just give you? I gave you photo sharing app. I gave you 3 words to describe what I'm building. Is that high fidelity? How detailed is that? When I said those words, your brain imagined the world's best photo sharing app that's going to be the perfect for you. And I guarantee the one that John imagined in his head is not the same as the one that Scott imagined in his head, or the one that I was planning to build. That's
you
why,
don't want to imagine what's in Scott's head, honestly.
Yeah, that's good to know. That's good to know. Yeah. So, but that's the other value. If you do a prototype, it's like, oh, that's what you were thinking. Oh, that's not so cool now, right? So that's the thing is, people just like, let's just do a survey. Surveys are not good for kind of like figuring out which features people want, right? So it's much better to talk to people about, individually, one-on-one, to get their needs. Of course, we want to pattern match and say, hey, I talked to 12 people. Only 1 mentioned this problem. Well, gosh, 11 out of 12 mentioned this other problem. Or we're going to use kind of simple math and not worry too much about statistical significance when we're doing this kind of early stage work.
The other problematic part of this is pricing and trying to establish an understanding of perceived value as well. That's a really tricky part of the uncertainty mix. What have you learned about, approaching that?
Pricing is a black box for almost everybody, right? Luckily at Intuit, we had been around for a while and we had to pick price points for our software packages. And we actually would hire like an external pricing, like PhD, these like rock star people, and they would go out and do surveys to get data of different price points in the right methodical way, right? In the right way, statistically significant, assuming that our competitors pick these other. So I've seen like the kind of nth degree scientific way of doing it, which is pretty cool, right? When you do that. But most people aren't in that situation, right? So what I've found is, let's stick with the early stage. Say I'm showing you a prototype. I'm showing Scott the prototype of the cool new podcasting software I'm going to be building. And he's like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. I love it. What's not a helpful question to say, great, Scott, how much would you be willing to pay for this? When you ask an open-ended pricing question, people have no clue, right? They have no clue what they're going to say. That's not good. So you want to kind of frame it in something, right? And a lot of times, that's why sometimes you see people say, hey, for the price of a latte, for the price it costs for a latte a day or something, right? Or, something like that. So what I prefer to do is not super precise, is pick a price point that you think you're thinking of doing, like, hey, $10 a month, and say, and then have some kind of scale of like, okay, Scott, after seeing this prototype, I'd love to hear how likely would you be, how willing would you be to pay $10 a month for this, and have some kind of scale, right? Some like a 5-point scale or 7-point scale. And then just ask several people and see what they say. So that's one way to get a sense. And then you can mix it up and ask this group of people $10 and see what you get. Ask the next group of people $15 and see what you get, right? And it's an interesting thing because it is value, and not to get too kind of economically minded about this, and customer value is a fuzzy concept, but the idea is all my frameworks are a way to make sure you're creating customer value, which is a certain value. Think about it as a number. You're going to be able to charge, up to, you can't charge more than that number. People aren't going to pay you. If I'm saving you, let's take a simple example. Say you are a podcaster and you're doing a podcast a week, and my software is going to save you 5 hours a week because it's just more efficient than all the other podcasting. And let's say your time is worth $100 an hour. So I'm saving you $500 a week, right, of time, right? That's the value. It's a very specific example to where you can actually quantify the value. You're going to be willing to pay $300 a month probably for that because I'm saving you $500. If I charge you $500, you're not going to do it, or $600, right? So there's that idea. And that's what you're trying to get at, is how much perceived value is. And again, the perceived value is going to vary by target segment, right? If I talk to someone who's not doing podcasts that often, say Scott's doing one once a week, that's 5 hours a week I can save him, but you're only doing once a month. I'm only going to save you 5 hours a month. The value you're going to get out of it is less, right? So that's part of it too, is always tying it back. And that's why what you see eventually, first is when you have one product, you have one price point. And then as you get more refined, if you go to all these SaaS products now, what do they have? They have multiple offerings. Oh, you want the basic? That has these things, right? They're starting to segment. Some of them do it well, some of them not. But the ones that do it well, they really understand their different segments. Okay, we've got the lightweight podcaster. Let's do this plan that's going to, be priced for their value and not have what they need. And then we've got the power podcaster. Let's do that, right? So that's kind of, eventually it ends up going right back to the base of that pyramid, target customer. And you end up with different price points for different customers based on the complexity of their needs, right? So the other last thing I'll say about pricing is it's hard to increase pricing. So always start out a little higher. You can always go down, but if you ever try to increase pricing, people get upset about it.
Is it true that people still by default tend to choose the one in the middle? I remember back in the 90s, they had the home bread maker, and they came out with it. Everybody was buying bread makers. Suddenly everybody had to make bread at home, at least in the States.
Oh, yeah.
They came out with a deluxe version. Nobody bought it.
Sure.
Instead of pulling it, they came out with an even more deluxe version. And now suddenly everybody bought the one in the middle, which was the original deluxe version. Is that still a behavior that you see?
There's definitely psychology around that. If you go to a lot of these SaaS product pages, on the pricing pages, they often have 3. The one in the middle often is bigger and kind of pops more, and so it's like a little Goldilocks. People are like, well, I don't want to do the cheapest. I don't want to do the most expensive. There's a little bit when they don't know. That's kind of a psychology. I mean, other people's mindsets are, let me start out with the basic one. I can always upgrade if I need more. Other people I don't want to mess around. Give me the Cadillac version from the get-go. I don't want, so different people have different, again, it goes back to that target market.
Let's go back to the kind of some of the leadership challenges around this. In the corporate accelerators that we built and worked in, we find constantly that helping leaders to assess the risk and uncertainty and the kind of opportunities that they're looking at is a real problem. What have you learned about how to help leaders make better decisions and make good bets?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is adding some maturity to the process by how they identify what big products are going to work on, right? And it kind of reminds me, when I talk about my workshop from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he's got this example with this glass jar and the big rocks and the pebbles and the sand. And the big rocks are basically the big initiatives that you're hoping are going to really move the needle on your business, and the pebbles are the medium impact, and the sand's all the other little stuff that you do, right? So how companies, the biggest, most telling thing is by what methodology do companies identify the big rocks they're trying to accomplish this year or this quarter? And it can either be kind of executive dictate, here's the 3 rocks. I came down from the mountain or out of my shower, and here's the 3 rocks that we're going to do. That's a very risky way of doing it, right? Versus, hey, what are we hearing from the market? A more market customer informed version, one that's based on competitive analysis of where we think the market is going. And then I think regardless of how you come up with the list of big rocks that you're going to do for the year, the real question is, okay, what degree of confidence do we have that, if we build this, it's going to deliver the value to customers that we expect, and therefore the value to our business that we expect. And you have to be honest and say, what is it? What's the evidence that we have? How much have we talked to any customers about this? Have any customers explicitly asked for this? If they haven't, I mean, like shooting fish in a barrel is basically like, okay, we talked to 10 customers. They all said this was a high importance need. None of them are happy with how it's being met today. That's like the strongest signal you can get versus, hey, have you thought about blockchain? How it could revolutionize your business? No, I actually haven't, because that's not a clear and present need that I have right now. So when you try to force something on somebody or sell something, like, oh, you just don't know you need this yet, but let me tell you, it's going to be amazing. Right? That's a very risky selling proposition versus, gosh, we talked to them, they're complaining about X, they're actively complaining about X. Like, that's a no-brainer way to create value, right? And I have a whole importance versus satisfaction framework to help quantify those things and categorize them, right? So that's what you want to do at the high level, is just say, okay, what evidence do we have? And if we don't have evidence, let's go, we don't want to do a major research project. We can't spend months doing research, but let's just do a little bit. The difference between zero research or data and some is huge, right? And so that's part of it too, is everyone's moving so fast, right? Speed is of the essence, and we're trying to do too many things. So it's really just like this ready, fire, aim kind of situation where it's like, okay, here's the 3 big rocks for the year. Go, 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 go. Well, did you vet these? Did you get, no, we don't have time. Yeah. So it's like no one gets ahead of it. There's no planning aspect to it. It's all execution, right? And if you just kind of think of it like a short-term versus long-term mindset, it's like 99% of the time, most people are in the short term. What do I need to get done today? What do I need to get done this week? What do I need to get done this month? Maybe if you're lucky, what needs to ship on March 31st? It's amazing how many major software features ship on these magical dates of March 31st and June 30th and October 31st, right? These arbitrary quarter deadlines, So anyway, that's a long-winded answer, but basically, kind of planning, carving out breathing room for the long term. And long term may just be like, hey, not like 10 years out, but like, hey, what are we doing next year? If we're planning these big rocks for next year, what research should we be doing now or 2 quarters from now? If you here's 1 quarter ahead, honestly, a quarterly cadence is great. So if you have a quarterly cadence, you're saying, okay, what lightweight research should we be doing this quarter so that we can pick the right big rocks for next quarter, and just getting out of that trap.
In addition to the short-term mindset versus long-term mindset, in the teams that you work with, what other elements are you seeing? What other mindsets are you seeing between those who are willing to experiment and, engage in, rapid fire feedback loops versus those who are more, closed off to that in the experiment?
Yeah. I mean, one is the biggest thing is the solution versus problem. Do you have that? Does someone in the leadership team have that awareness of like, what's the problem? Are we just continually randomly? It's kind of like throwing spaghetti at the wall. It's like, okay, we're throwing solution spaghetti at the wall. Something will stick. If you're doing that, then you don't have a problem set mindset. The other one is if you ask people, of course, everyone's going to say they're customer centric, but are you walking the walk or just talking the talk, right? When's the last time you actually talked to a customer? That kind of cuts through all the baloney. When's the last time you or your team, or you can ask anybody on your team, just point out and go, hey, when's the last time you actually had direct firsthand contact with the customer? Because a lot of times it's through proxy. Sales team, oh yeah, client X needs feature X. Client A, that's what I call proxy, right? And as we know, sales doesn't always get it right. When we build what they say, it doesn't always come true. What they said doesn't always come true. It usually doesn't come true, right? Because there was some misinterpretation. The client, and even clients will demand solutions. I need you to build X for me, because they weren't clear on the problem. The number of times I've seen like a startup so excited to land a big client like IBM or somebody, and the big client says, I need you to build X for me. And the startup salutes and says, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. And they build it and they launch it. And then the big client doesn't use it because they weren't clear on the things in the beginning, right? So how truly customer-centric are you? The other thing that's going on, it's trending in the right direction, is a whole waterfall versus agile kind of mindset, right? A lot of companies are going through this digital transformation. They're used to doing it the old way, like 1 year product plans, kind of Gantt charts, like big monolithic launches. It's like the riskiest way to launch software is to say, let's go into a cave for a year and have people code, and then let's just ship what they build after a year. The odds of that going well is very, very low, right? So in contrast, are you embracing, like, acknowledging you don't know what you don't know and switching to Agile? Luckily, that's a pretty strong transformation that most companies are going through. By the time they call me, many of them are already like, oh yeah, we embraced Agile 2 years ago. We're well on our journey there. Now we want to kind of improve upstream what we're putting into the Agile apparatus, right? As I like to say, imagine for a sec, you have like an Agile Ferrari. Like, this thing is like, you just, whatever you put into the Agile factory comes out quickly, bug-free, high quality. Then the question becomes, well, what do you want to put in the factory? Should we ask them to build feature X or feature Y? Because they'll build it flawlessly, quickly. And so that's where you realize, oh gosh, once we're building Agile in an Agile manner, we really need to make sure, you need to make sure anyway, but you can build really bad stuff quickly instead of, instead of waiting a year. So that's another one, and then the last one I would say, kind of related, these all kind of correlate, is how hierarchical is the organization, right? If it's like we've got the genius executive who comes up with all the answers, and then everyone below them just kind of executes on what they say, you're not setting yourself up really. You don't have what we call empowered teams, autonomous teams. Back to the point we were talking about earlier, you're constraining their creativity. You're not letting them. So it's better to, aim a team at a problem. Hey, we want to improve this customer problem, or we want to drive this business metric. Give them what you want to accomplish. Let them come back to you with recommendations on how they think the best way to accomplish it was. You can certainly review. It's not saying you give them an infinite leash. You can certainly review what the recommendations are. Yeah, I agree with those two. This one I'm not so sure about. But so those are some of the things that I see between the ones that are making progress on being more successful in their product efforts versus those that are having trouble.
And a final question, because I know we're close to the our allotted time. Given everything that's happened in the last 2 years, and I'm not thinking about ways of working, but just the kind of impetus that the pandemic has created on product design, and what we're experiencing now with supply chain problems and so on. How do you think that's going to play out in terms of how people think about creating great products in the future? Do you think it's going to make a significant difference to the way that we're thinking about things?
Well, what's interesting is, some companies were already kind of starting to embrace remote work before COVID happened. And it's very interesting. Some of us that are more old school, we've been in the room on the whiteboard with the designer and the developer. That is a very good feeling. You can really crank on stuff. There's no higher fidelity communication than when you're all in the same room on the same whiteboard, and so you can be, I'm very pragmatic, not dogmatic. It'd be very easy to be dogmatic and say that's the way it has to be. I think that, COVID has forced people to think about how can we get as close to that experience as we can with digital tools, right? Zoom is great. We've got great tools. You've got whiteboard tools like Miro and things like that. So I think, and you've got, Jira, you've got tools for teams to communicate. So I think that people have realized that we need to kind of get as close to that experience as we can. And that's the other thing, back to this, what are good organizations doing versus the not so good ones, is that they're embracing it. When I dial into a team meeting and no one has their video camera on, right? And that's the norm. And it's just, we're going through the motions of the meeting and no one's sharing, maybe no one's sharing the screen. They're all looking at Jira independently. So, you really need to think about, how are we driving these group conversations? Is there a facilitator? What's the goal of this meeting, and how can we do that, right? It's back to, how does that creative work happen? How do we, if I'm the product manager, then I just got done doing 12 customer interviews. Hopefully some of the other team members were able to join. It doesn't make sense that they can go to all of them. How can I relay that information to my team in a way that they're going to really internalize? And from there, how can we brainstorm ideas, right? So it's really, how do we not inhibit the creativity, the team creativity, by virtue of not being in the same place? So I've seen a lot of good progress there that teams have done, right? Virtual stand-ups as well. And, so that's part of it, is adapting to that. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that has faced people, because some people, it was working fine in person, and then they had to adapt to, gosh, well, now we can't be in the same room with the developer and the designer. What do we do? And I think many teams have adapted in good ways to making that be as good as it can. Other thing, the tools are always progressing, right? When I wrote the book, there were prototyping tools around, like InVision and Balsamiq. They're both still around. Balsamic's still my favorite low fidelity prototyping tool. But now you've got like Figma. Figma has emerged in the last several years. So Figma is a great way, as an example of a way where the team can collaborate on a design. The designer can come up with a V1 design, put it up there, people can comment and see it, right? So that's kind of the idea, is how can we work in a collaborative manner? More of these tools are engaging those collaborative workflows when people are working remotely. So that's what I see. So I think it's exciting. I also, I just did my first workshop in person in 2 years. Everyone felt great about it. It was so good to be back in person. So I think that people will be excited when they can do it in person. But in the meantime, the tools and processes have kind of adapted to make it as good as it can be short of that.
So speaking of workshops, how can our listeners get in contact with you, Dan?
The main place is my website, dan-olsen.com. So dan-olsen.com. There's links to the talks that I give, and the public workshops that I give. I give a lot of private workshops, as you can imagine. A lot of the clients that we were talking about, they're private workshops, and it's exciting to see so many companies. And it's not just the pure software companies. As a lot of my companies, my clients, I like to say that they existed well before the internet. Like for, decades before the internet, they existed as a very successful business, and now they're going through what we all call digital transformation. So I love doing private workshops. My book, The Lean Product Playbook, is just on Amazon. People want to check it out. So if you Google Dan Olsen, you'll find me.
Brilliant.
Cool.
Well, Dan, thank you. This has been really, really practical and clear and inspiring. So thanks for your time.
Dan, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, John Scott, thanks so much for having me on here.
All right. Until next time, folks, remember, the world is evolving. Are you?